Hi there. This is a topic that I've had kind of close to my heart for a while, and I've really wanted to make a video about. I've actually made a few videos about it in the past, but they just didn't come out as clean. But I'm hoping this is the one that I finally get to upload. So this topic is not as related to the other ones on the channel, because if you've been watching the videos on the channel, you probably know that they're primarily based around the video game industry. But one topic which I've sort of had to give advice to a lot of people about is whether they should go to music school or study music at university. Have it at tertiary level, as we say in the UK. And that's a hell of a question, actually. And there's a lot of different thought processes that I think people should take before going into it. And the first one is, are you actually talented enough to actually have a career in the music industry? Because, just being quite good doesn't really cut it. It's really competitive. And while one could definitely say that there's different levels of success within the industry, I think to even make any money with it would require either an insane amount of talent or incredible connections. And both are hard work. I'm not actually going to go ahead and view one above the other, because I think that's completely unfair. Having great connections while still being, an able musician, I'd actually say is better than just being an excellent musician. Because you could be like a master at your instrument, but live in the middle of nowhere and not really have the access to people who want to listen to your music. And it'd be very hard to get that career going, because there's a lot of talented people out there, and there's a lot of people online and just uploading good music on YouTube and SoundCloud and stuff like that. It's very hard. You might be really talented, you might write great songs, but if nobody has access to them, or they can't get to it through the massive crowd of musicians and the massive catalog of music out there, it's tough. You might not make a penny out of your music. So these are things you need to consider. One sort of metric, I'd say, depending on the size of your school, because I'm sort of assuming that if you're watching this video, you're about to make that big leap into whether you want to make this your career. So if you're still in school, a good metric is, are you the best musician at your school? Assuming your school has maybe somewhere between 1,000 to 2,000 students. If it's a lot smaller, then you should definitely be one of the best musicians, if not the best musician in your school. Because that in itself is not really a very large pool of people, and only a small group of them are actually going to really take music that seriously. So if you're not really the best there, then chances are you're going to have a hard time competing. This is assuming that you're sort of in a career where you're trying to be more a musician who is an excellent musician. Now, this might sound a bit strange, because if you're in a band and that band gets picked up, you can be a mediocre musician and still have a career of sorts. So that's the other aspect of it, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this is with the assumption that you've got these big aspirations. You want to be this massive songwriter or a composer or concert pianist or something like that, right? And so yes, you need to have a very high level by the time you're 18. And unfortunately, age also kicks into it quite a bit, because the brain learns the most when you're young. It's a lot harder to pick up an instrument when you're older. I even found that from going to music school, because obviously I did go, that's one of the reasons I feel I have the right to make a video about this. Since I went for my second degree, so I wasn't even there that young, since I was able to pick up a lot of techniques from the age of, what was I, 20 to 22, I have those techniques in my fingers now. And the music that I do write commercially, be it for video games or for some commercials I wrote, I don't have to practice as much every day as I had to before because I've got a lot of the techniques in my fingers. I've got a lot of the knowledge of how to write music successfully already in me, and it was good I learned young. I'm not going to say it's impossible to learn it later in life. Of course, it's still possible, but it's just a lot easier when you're younger. So there is that. The other thing is you have to really love it, because unless you're very, very lucky or you really have those connections, there's going to be a lot of endurance. There's going to be a lot of hardship. Like, it's one of those tropes that's really famous, but it's really true. A career in music is very, very difficult. It's not something that a lot of people pay for. There are routes, but for the most part, people just consume music cheaply now, especially, through streaming sites. This would have even happened a good 20, 30 years ago when CDs sort of died. That was the height of the music industry. The music industry made so much money off CDs back in the day, but now a lot of people just stream it for very cheap on like Spotify, YouTube Music, Apple Music, things like that. So a lot of artists now really make their money gigging. So, and that's the other thing. You need to have a lot of endurance. You have to be able to do a lot of live shows. It's tough. Even if you're trying to be a composer, there's a tough, like, kind of stairs or a tough ladder to it, a tough climb. I've got friends who, yes, they compose and produce for massive TV shows and things like that, but it's been 10 years since all of us were in music school, and they followed that route. I went via video games. And whilst a lot of them have good credits and are able to live off music full time, they're still struggling to get first credit. So they're working as assistant composers, and the main composer still gets the main credit. They might be in the credits later, but yeah, it's not easy. And it's a type of industry where once you're in, you stay for a long time, because your physical ability when composing is not as related. Like, as long as you can sit down and write music and you've got those connections, your career can keep going. So a lot of these composers compose well into their 80s and 90s. So that's something you have to bear in mind, that it might seem like a trope, but it is quite true. It's not easy, and there's definitely a fight. So that's something else. Like, if you're having doubts about it, and there's another career that you might enjoy just as much and is a bit safer, take that career, because the music is very hard, and it's hard to express, because you'll see like successful people having their concerts, you'll read their bios in Wikipedia, and unfortunately I think you might end up being influenced by survivorship bias. You'll see that, oh, things went well for them, and you'll feel, oh yeah, maybe I could pull it off as well. I can pull it off in a few years. Because that's sort of the case as well, because rather unfortunately, but that's where entertainment works, attractiveness is another factor. So your chance of scoring a deal is a lot higher when you're younger. So it's sort of a career that you have to really decide upon earlier in life, because your chance of making it when you're middle-aged is a lot less. It's possible. I'm not saying it's impossible. There's definitely cases out there, and I'm sure the comment section is gonna drown with examples. But for the most part, especially if you're kind of going on the more pop side of things, youth is definitely a factor in it. And even if you're kind of going to try to be a composer, or a composer or producer, youth still is a part of it, because they'll expect you to have composed or produced quite a bit by a certain age. And there's a lot, making connections within the industry, again, the youth is sort of important, because you're expected to sort of party quite a bit and get to know a lot of people. It's a lot harder if you're middle-aged. Sorry to say, not to say it's not possible. If you produce really good music, maybe online they'll find you, but honestly, this industry is all about connections. Okay, cool. So back to music school and whether you should go. So let's assume that yes, you have the talent, and yes, you're ready to do what it takes to succeed. Like, you're ready to endure all these concerts, be in a wedding band, stuff like that. A lot of stuff that they don't really tell you about in all these bios of successful musicians, but sometimes you have to do. One other big factor is whether you live in a big city or in a small city. So if you live in like New York or LA and you're already a talented musician, you might not actually have to go to music school. The reason here is that I found that when I went to music school, I learned more from like writing and producing and gigging with others or jamming with others than I sort of did in classes. I mean, yes, a lot of the classes were very good. Honestly, particularly the ones that were more about the industry than music itself. Like in Berklee, a lot of the classes are very jazz focused, which I think when you're doing it makes you feel, what the hell am I doing? Especially if you're not a jazz musician, which I sort of was. Like I like smooth jazz, but there's a lot of hard harmonies and stuff like that beyond the technical scope of what a lot of musicians need. So there was that, but actually it's a very good foundation for almost everything else, particularly video game music. Bring it back there for a minute, because video game music evolved a lot from city pop, which is this Japanese kind of genre that emerged in the 80s, if you know, like Tetsuro Yamashita. And that evolved a lot from fusion jazz, which was very popular in the late 70s, early 80s. So if you know bands like Cassiopeia or T-Square. And so that's actually quite like handy for video game writing. But anyway, back to the topic of the thing. So yeah, collaborating with others was where I sort of learned a little bit more. The classes were good. Okay, it's worth it. Especially if some of that stuff might not come naturally to you. The classes were worth it. But I did feel that I learned a little bit more from collaborating. And with all fairness, Berklee has a lot of labs where you are collaborating with others in music, because they know that that's really primarily where you're gonna learn a lot of new stuff and get new ideas. So if you do live in a big city and have some form of connection, you might find that you're learning a bit more from recording with others and gigging with others and stuff like that. However, if you're from a small city and you don't have this opportunity, then I'd actually say yes, music school might actually be worth it for you to then go to a place where there's other musicians, because not all music schools are in big cities, and really learn from others. I don't necessarily think you have to finish, but just having that experience of being around other musicians is really, really worth it. So that's another idea there. Of course, the other thing is money. Obviously, Berklee is famously expensive, so, you know, it's gonna sound really bad, but maybe go for just a semester to make the connections, but then still keep gigging with people. And you know, the first few classes are very handy, but some of the more advanced ones, unless you really think you're gonna have a career there, might not be as handy. Like there's ones about brass arrangement and string arrangement, and that's all well and good, but it's gonna be a lot more useful if you're somebody who's actually in the industry and you actually have to write, you know, a big brass section or for orchestra and stuff like that. But honestly, the chance of that being your career is not that high. And you might be able to force your way through it through sheer talent anyway. I know that sounds bizarre, but yeah, you sort of can, if you're talented enough. Another factor is where you're from. This sounds a bit funny, but I'm guessing because of YouTube statistics and stuff like that, that the vast majority of you are, or at least 30 to 40% of you are from the US. If you're American, maybe you can skip this bit, because in terms of media and music industry and stuff like that, you have an advantage that you may not realize you have. One of those being that, let's say you want to be a film composer, you can just stay in Los Angeles and, you know, work in the service industry until you get a big break. This is not available to foreigners. Foreigners can't work a different industry than the one they studied in America. So for example, when I graduated from Berklee, I was given the option to get a visa. It's called the OPT, I believe, which allows you to work, but only in the industry that you graduated from. So even though, for example, I graduated from engineering back in the UK, I couldn't actually have gotten an engineering job in the US at the time because I hadn't studied engineering there, I studied music. So that's another important factor. If you're a foreigner and you've gone, you know, and you want to make it sort of big, it is kind of crucial that you be in the US. Like, of course, there's a lot of British bands that made it, and you can definitely make it in the UK. I'd say the UK is probably one of the other really good options. But if you're from any other country, you might be able to make a living from, being a local band, and it might even actually be a really good living. But just bear that into mind, that if you're trying to make it there, it is a bit difficult. Though this all also stems into connections, and that's sort of the other big point about going to music school. If you already have great connections and you've got the skill level, I actually don't think you should go to music school, because you can just, like I said, gig with others, get to know people, network, and you'll just get so much out of that. But you might not get that much from music school in comparison. However, if you have those connections, like, somebody who very much wants to put you in the industry, be it like an uncle, aunt, very close friend, parent, somebody who will feel a certain level of obligation of helping to push you into the industry, but maybe your technical level's not quite there yet, then actually, music school might be a bit of a good investment for you so that you're technically there. Because one of the worst things that can happen for your career is that you have an opportunity with somebody who's quite influential. It's a bird. You have a connection with somebody who's quite influential. You turn up, but you don't have the chops. So in that other situation, I actually think it's quite good to go to music school, so you get the chops there, and then you turn up, and then you can then be part of the industry. But like I said, these are all slightly unique situations, but if you've kind of been gigging with others and have kind of made a few connections here and there, you'll find that it's not that rare. So, take these different factors into mind, like I said, like, where you're from, do you live in a big city or small city, your technical level, and what connections you have. I'd say these are the most important factors. And then based on that, you can sort of decide whether you should go to music school or not. Just bear in mind that obviously studying at a university is very expensive, career options are hard. So you'd need to have at least a few of these things lined up to make sure that you have a good chance at being in the industry. Now, it might sound like I've said a lot of negative things, but it is a great joy once you're in. So for a few years, I wrote music for commercials, and it was quite rewarding. The only thing I didn't like was that the money was up and down quite a lot. Because, for example, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Valentine's, lots of money, lots of commercials, but then other seasons, it kind of dipped down. But when I did write the music and I saw my music out there, it was very, very satisfying. And even just having a career where you can make money doing something you love so much is, again, very satisfying. So if you're thinking about having a career in music and you want to think about whether you want to go to music school, just bear these factors into mind before you go. There's a lot of advantages in going, but there's also a lot of expense. Ambulances. But you know what, I'm going to keep this video anyway. So there you go. Take that advice, and I hope this video is useful to you.